Hey y'all, happy Thursday. I believe it's Thursday. Yeah, Thursday. Welcome to Tech Backstage. I am joined today by Rachel Carpenter, the CEO and founder of Intrinio. Rachel, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Eddie.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in. Lot of ground to cover today, especially in regards to the cool work that you guys are doing at Intrinio and just how it relates to the financial space, right? Before we dive into that, we always like to give our listeners kind of a quick intro into who you are, your backstory, and how you came to found Intrinio. Really kind of intrigued by your background as well, as an engineer and in software. So
Yeah,
would love to hear, just a little bit more about you.
sure. Yeah. So I studied finance and entrepreneurship in college initially, and met my co-founder while I was in school studying. And we graduated and decided we wanted to build our own app, which is not what Intrinio does. It like brought us to Intrinio. It was like the first problem we tried to solve and ran into a bigger problem, kind of a thing. And so I had this like deep desire to be an entrepreneur, a deep desire to be my own boss, start a company that would change the world, right? Like I had a lot of entrepreneurial blood running through my veins. And when I graduated and we decided we wanted to build this investment app together, right, in this kind of like fintech intersection, we knew we needed to get some tech skills if we were going to get this thing built.
Right.
And it was kind of like that interesting decision you make as a founder, where it's like, do I hire a technical co-founder? Do I teach myself how to code? And like, frankly, I honestly wouldn't recommend that you teach yourself how to code because it takes a decade to become a really, really good engineer. We did. And it helped a little bit because having the financial knowledge, like my co-founder was a CPA, right? And I had a degree in finance. And so without having to put a CPA over the shoulder of an engineer, like both were inside of our brains, right? Once we learned to code, we could move pretty quickly. But learning to code was a nightmare, right? Like I literally typed into Google, how do you program? And I've got no money. I'm sleeping on my co-founder's couch. I'm learning how to program. We're getting this app built. And these were just like the early, like tough years, but we were young and we were hungry and getting after it. And so I really, after college, like jumped straight into building this app and starting a company. The problem, of course, which I'm sure we'll dive into in more detail later, is we were illegally screen scraping data from 10,000 websites to plug in all of the inputs that we needed into the app that we were building. And so that's what really got us mad, because we couldn't afford that data. We couldn't really like legally launch our app, and it like killed the entire thing. So I went through this like college phase. I went through this like hungry learning to code, getting started phase. And then I went through this just like absolutely disheartening, like terrible phase where I realized I had to massively pivot and kind of like focus on data. Like that was the bigger problem that we ran into. And then that launched like the whole second stage of the entrepreneurial journey. I was raising money from investors. I was hiring my first team and getting scaled up and building all of our tech. So it has been a journey. Lots of twists and turns around the way.
Yeah, I was actually reading a nice article on Medium today talking about the death of entrepreneurship because it's just so hard. And people, I think they said like somewhere around 2015, it started to peak because people were just like, no, I think I'll just take the paycheck and the insurance. And
it's not for the lighthearted. It is hard.
And I love that whole, CPAs learning how to finance or learning how to finance, CPAs learning how to finance, CPAs learning how to code. Yeah, and I mean you're right. It's not for the faint of heart, and I think it's very rewarding when you look at it from the perspective of you can change the world through technology, but it's a tall order to be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go in and learn how to code, and yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there from a lot of different angles. But the thing I love and the thing that I really resonated with in your origin story was talking about illegally scraping data because which is something it's pretty common nowadays, but people aren't really supposed to do it. But I think the really heavy thing here is the data that you're scraping, especially in regards to market data.
Right.
That stuff is heavily protected.
Yes.
Like they do not like you doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and, you know, like we were talking about backstage, I kind of got a first glimpse into this, you know, recently building some trading platforms and just realizing that these people are the definition of gatekeepers, right? They do not want people like you and me getting free access to the data because, you know, people like you and me traditionally haven't been the people that, you know, we're not in the secret society. We're not part of the cool kids club that gets to trade directly on Wall Street, and, you know, we're supposed to contact our broker and they're supposed to put the trades in for us, and we're supposed to be quiet and compliant in our corner, right?
Yeah.
So now here you are with Intrinio kind of breaking down all those walls. Talk to me a little bit, like just high level.
Right.
You know, what were some of the first like really big hurt? You know, so you like you raised some money, and you guys have been around for 10 years. So like, you know, you've been doing this as, you know, as trading's become more mainstream. But, you know, talk to us about some of the initial problems that you had with, I guess, just interfacing with this not, you know, normal person friendly industry.
Yeah, no, you're hitting the nail on the head. I mean, it's wild, right? We've for some reason decided that like financial statement data should be open and accessible to everybody to
Right.
see, right? That stuff's free. Like you can go get 10Ks and 10Qs, and you can, if I want to invest in Apple, I have free access to, in theory, it's a mess and we clean up a lot of data. But I have access to know what their revenue is and their expenses,
Right.
and I can look at all that information. But if I want to stream the real-time stock price, it's like $10,000 a month, like to get a real-time streaming SIP level stock price, and it's
Right.
wild, right? The stock exchanges are self-regulated entities, which is wild, and I
Right.
could talk about that for hours, right? And they can charge whatever you want. And if you're not a large institution that can afford tens of thousands of dollars monthly, there's asymmetrical access to the information, and it's kind of insane. And it's just there's a lot of politics and a lot of regulation happening behind the scenes. But in theory, that's data that everybody should have access to, right? Every investor should be able to understand the fundamental profile of a company and stock prices and that side of it as well. And so there's still so many rules that we can't get around, right?
Yeah.
If we're a middleman distributor of that data, we have to pay the exchange fees too, right? And so we feel the pain too. But what we've tried to do in that space to innovate and to support this, you know, this rise of all these retail investors and innovators and individual quants and app builders that are flooding the market is find ways to unlock some of that data in really creative ways. So, I mean, we were helped a little bit by things like, you know, new stock exchanges like IEX popped up and they had free access to data, but they only have 2% market volume trading on their exchange. So the prices aren't that great. But what happens if you take multiple of those smaller exchanges that don't have any restrictions and fees and you weave the prices together, and in an aggregate, you have a pretty high volume SIP replica style feed with no restrictions, right? That's a game changer for an app developer, somebody who wants to display that real-time price. And so that's some of the innovations that we've been working on in like crafting unique real-time feeds that are really high quality without restrictions, everything that the innovators and the app developers are wanting. So we do a lot of work on that side, but hurdles, challenges, oh my gosh, right? Like it's not easy working with these guys. Filling out exchange paperwork is wild. Like if you use it wrong, if you entitle, if you're a pro versus a non-pro, a display versus non-display, you've got exchange fees, you've got per user fees, you've got redistribution fees. It is very complex by design, right?
Well, so, yeah, of course.
Yeah. We spend a lot of time making sure our customers don't break the rules and don't get in trouble in that space.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. You know, it's designed to be complex on purpose. The funny thing is that they want to give everybody access to trade because that means they have access to everybody's money, but they don't want everybody to have the same access that they do as far as when they get the information. And the difference between real-time data, you know, trading like right there on the moment versus, you know, trading on information that's, you know, even a couple seconds old potentially, that's a big difference because that can make or break the trade, right? So, you know, I think the other thing too is that, like you said, with the regulations, I remember kind of having to go through all of that stuff that you're just talking about right now. Like, is it for individual use? Is it for redistribution? Is it commercial? You know, like how are you using the data? And they're not exactly clear on the definition of each one of those. Like you really have to kind of go digging through a lot of, like long form reading that's going to like kind of put you to sleep if you don't know what it is, So, yeah, 100% agree with you. And, again, I love the idea of kind of like stitching together, the smaller exchanges to bring more volume. Um, does that help you when you're starting to approach like one of the larger exchanges when you can go to them and be like, hey, we've already worked with some smaller exchanges, these are some of the results we're having, or are they just big enough that they're like, yeah, we don't really care?
They don't care. They're so big.
Of course,
And
yeah.
like NASDAQ and NYSE are the dedicated SIP providers. They got away with that somehow. And so they just make hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars off of the aggregate SIP feed. And it's a huge source of revenue for them. So I don't think they care as much. And I think it's almost a different customer profile too, right? Like if you're a high frequency trader, you're probably going to co-locate, like you're going to have your servers physically like near the exchanges, right? Like
right.
You're going to have these big exchange agreements directly with NASDAQ versus like this generation of innovators and app developers who want something more affordable, more approachable. Like that's kind of where we play. And so we do sell NASDAQ's data and we sell NYSE's data and we do have great relationships with all the exchanges, but we're also making accessible products.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For like the regular person.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about like, let's talk a little bit about the trends in actual trading, like the people who are trading nowadays, because there's a lot of things that have happened recently. I think probably one of the most popular ones is like Robinhood, for example. Like that was a really big example when their mobile app came out, because and I think it's almost a case study in user experience, because they weren't the first company to put an app on the App Store for trading, right? But they're one of the first ones that really, I think, got a lot of, at least in my opinion, I could probably be wrong. I've been wrong a lot, but they're one of the first ones that I think really got kind of a mainstream following, because they kind of helped educate regular people on how to trade, and the user interface was easy to use, it was easy to understand, they had kind of like step-by-step instructions on what to do. I think I signed up for it once just to try it. Like they even give you a little bit of money to invest, like so like things like Robinhood have really opened that up to, you call them retail investors, right? But what's that shift been? You guys have been around since 2012. When did you start seeing that shift? Because I feel like you guys were kind of like really right at the front of that wave, right?
Yeah. We were definitely ahead of our time a little bit. But it's been I've noticed it as early as 5-6 years ago, but the acceleration over the past 2 years, especially through COVID, has been insane, right? Like, and even most recently, the whole Reddit GameStop debacle, like that was big, right?
Right.
That accelerated it even further. But within this like rise of the retail investor, like rise of the individual, like democratization trend, there's so many facets to it that have been super interesting. I've been keeping my eye on, right? Like to your point, there's like education is a huge piece. Like that's becoming more accessible now. User experience, education, accessibility of all the tools, the apps, that's huge. Investor voices is really huge too. Say.com was a company that was a client of ours that we were watching for a long time, and Robinhood acquired them. And Say.com was basically like, okay, yeah, maybe I'm just Joe Schmo, but like I own shares of Facebook. I should have a say here somehow. Like my voice should be heard by this company. Like I have opinions. And so Say.com was like bringing those investor voices forward, right? And like putting more attention on the small guys. There's a new company now called Equity Animal out there, which I think I'm watching. I think they're super interesting. They're kind of revamping investor relations, similar to Say.com, but more so like in the earnings calls, like let's get some individuals up there talking and asking like important questions to these CEOs. Like they're holding earnings calls on Twitter Spaces. Right. Instead of like an earnings call being held on some old webcast with like 5 analysts from like Goldman on the call, right? You and I could hop into the earnings call and ask questions to the CEOs. Like it's just that like rise of accessibility to the individual investor that's kind of riding on the coattails of like to your point, the UX, the education, the accessibility, the apps, the tools, like it's all becoming available now to the everyday investor. And so the power dynamic is tipping, and it's quickly.
But follow-up question to that. Do you think that's because the markets and the exchanges really want people to have that access? Or is it really more people like you and companies like Intrinio that are kind of like just beating down the door, and no offense, like
Yeah.
insistently, like, you know, like,
Uh-huh.
hey, we're going to scrape the
Oh, yeah,
data. And they're
thanks,
like,
sadly.
but you know, like, hey, we're gonna go out and scrape the data, and they're like, you can't do that, and people are just kind of like, well, we're gonna do it anyways. Like,
Yeah.
is it really like are, you know, us like normal folk, are we just really kind of forcing their hand, or is this, you know, like, have you seen it more as like a gradual progression of adoption from the exchanges because they realize there is this market out there? Like, what do you think that dynamic's like?
The big institutions aren't even the ones spearheading it, right? It is more of a beat down the door type attitude, like in a similar track, right? Like Goldman Sachs launched all these like consumer things and then just shut it all down just
Right.
recently, right? David Solomon was like, oh, just kidding. We are
Yep.
better at selling to these like big institutions. And so like, they're just not even good at it. And so
Right.
there will be, and there is this rise of like earlier stage innovators who are pushing the envelope and starting to make these services more accessible. And I think some of the big guys are interested in it. They don't think enough money is there. They don't think it's worth it. And so I don't see a lot of the big institutions trying to touch this market. I think it's more of the innovators coming in to serve them.
Yeah, but like you said, like the exchanges are kind of like slowly coming around to the fact that, you know, this is, I mean, I guess it's you know, it's inevitable at this point,
Yeah.
but you know, I think maybe they're just kind of slowly coming on board with that, right? That, you know, like,
Yeah.
hey, people want to do this, right? And I think a lot of this even boils down to the fact that I think it's generational for sure. But
Yeah.
like one of the things that I was reading too the other day, well, not the other day, a little while ago, but you know, especially people in newer generations, they want to have control over their finances, right? It's no longer that, and you know, again, I think this is probably gradual, but you know, you talk about our parents, like they were really more like, oh, hey, I'm going to go use my financial advisor, or I'm going to use a traditional 401k. And people nowadays want to have a lot more control over where their money's at.
Yeah.
And you know, they don't, I think they're less willing to just give it to somebody else and say,
Yeah.
you know, let me know how it goes. But also, you know, there's brokerage fees, and you know, there's financial advising fees, and
Mhm.
people, I think, you know, with the rise of the internet and the availability of information,
Yeah.
there's, you know, people are really like, oh, hey, I want to, you know, I want to take a shot at this, and you know, just kind of try and manage my own money, right?
You're totally right. And the sophistication is astounding, right? Like I have a lot of traditional investors, like former Citi, former Visa, like big investors from like old school, like Wall Street, right? And when they found out that we were selling options data, they were like, to individuals, like options, like they don't know what
Right.
they're doing. And I was like, yes, they do. I'm
Yeah.
like, we're selling this options data, plugging in it like clients like Olive Invest, like some of these options trading apps that have thousands of retail users like engaging in option, like complex options trading. Like, and
Right.
these apps are being powered by our options feed. And I'm continually astounded by the apps that are getting built with our data and what the end users are doing on, like, it's wildly sophisticated. It's quant stuff, it's options trading, it's AI oriented. Like they are more sophisticated than people give them credit for, all of these
Right.
individual traders, right? And to your other point too, like blockchain is, I think, overhyped and used in areas when it's not necessary, and not, but across finance, it is going to be one of the things that makes a lot of this more accessible, that removes the need for a broker, right? That removes the need and like breaks down some of those barriers to make this stuff even more accessible for these big.
Yeah, and you know, to that point too, talking about blockchain as well, I think that's also going to help with things like regulation, right? Because I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know, the exchanges obviously have their own ledgers, but if that stuff becomes public, if you start using, you know, public blockchain ledgers that anybody can, and there's going to be guys just and girls sitting in their rooms just going through those blockchain ledgers and going, hey, why did that guy trade, you know, 3.5 million shares right before that company went bankrupt? You know what I mean? You're like, oh, wait, that's some insider stuff. You know what I mean? So there's a lot more accountability. And I think that's, it's kind of a power shift, right? And, you know, like, you know, traditionally they've always been gatekeepers and they don't want people to get into the markets. And, it's always been kind of a boys club, I guess, so to speak, a little bit, right? But nowadays, people want to be involved. They want the same, they want the same access to these markets, that the big players do. And we also all want, accountability, right? Because, we're all playing by the rules, and it makes sense that everybody else should be able to play by, or should be required to play by the rules as well, right?
Yep. So so everybody can see Nancy Pelosi's trades now. There's whole APIs just for that.
Right. That's great. Yeah.
Huge.
Actually, that's a really good point. Let's talk a little bit about, some of the other data that you guys provide, because you provide options, you provide equities. I think we talked a little bit about, financial and quarterly earnings, but let's talk a little bit about some of the data that you guys are democratizing for the retail investor.
Yeah. So obviously we've touched on stock prices, right? That's like the baseline. Everybody needs to know what a stock price is, what it's trading at. And so lots of innovation around making that more accessible. Same with the options pricing. And then fundamental data is actually our bread and butter. It's like a super unsexy data set, but it's very necessary. And like you have to understand the financial profile of these companies that you're investing in. And like I said, that data is all available at the SEC, but it's not standardized. Like Apple reports cloud computing or just revenue, and Oracle is going to report like cloud computing revenue, hardware revenue, software revenue, consulting revenue. Like the transformation you have to do to the data to get even revenue to line up is wild. And so that we use a lot of machine learning and a lot of automation to systematically clean all that data and make it accessible. So yes, in theory, you can go to the SEC and you can download a financial statement, but you can't really use it in any systematic way until it's been cleaned. And so again, along the theme of like making it easier, making it more accessible, right? Most of these large vendors, these like traditional players like FactSet and S&P and Bloomberg, they use 10,000 people to clean that data. That's why it's inaccessible. Of course, that's super expensive to do that. And so they charge a lot of money for the data. We have a team of like 2 people and a machine learning, right? So we can charge really affordable prices for this stuff. So it's through the use of the AI in the background and all of the automation that makes our costs low. And then the cost savings pass on to the end user. And so all of that efficiency behind the scenes, the whole point of that is, okay, then the end product that we're making and all of these data sets that we're selling, they're going to be accessible. They're going to be easy. They're going to be affordable. That's the whole goal behind it. So those are kind of the core areas that we work in.
So question here really quick, because speaking about unsexy topics, data transformation is probably one that you don't think about as being all that exciting, right?
Well, I love it, but I'm
right.
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, like we're 2 for 2 in this room right now. There's 2 people that enjoy data transformation. But if you talk about the majority of the world, I don't think data transformation is something that they're like, oh, I think I'm going to go down and sit down on my computer for 8 hours and figure out how to transform everything into like standardized output, right? But are you saying that you guys, I'm assuming you guys have some ETL pipelines and stuff like that set up, but it sounds like you guys you lean heavily on machine learning to standardize this, these kind of unstructured, reports.
Yeah. We've got like 9 or 10 different machine learning algorithms. They battle each other, and whichever one standardizes the financial better wins. And one of our top kind of analysts, his name is Phil, and we have this thing called Robo Phil, which is basically the system like watched him for a long time and watched how he standardized things. And all of that data was trained on, and it just basically became a robotic version of Phil, right? So we've like automated Phil. And now if you would have a professional like analyst and data engineer like him look at a financial statement and clean it, we don't even need Phil to do it anymore. I always joke, I'm like, you're going to automate yourself out of a job, Phil. But yeah, that's kind of the tech that we have going on in the background, but it is heavily driven by machine learning, and that's what makes it so fast and so affordable.
I have just a couple more questions around that, because I think that's really important, especially, like as we're talking about making this data affordable to, just the everyday investor. I think the machine learning plays a huge part in it, right? But so when you're talking about, the machine learning actually watching Phil, I really get kind of like this Ex Machina vibe where like there's a robot in the corner watching me code, which kind of creeps me out. But I imagine it's probably not that exciting. Like, talk us through a little bit about, I mean, if you can, about how that works. I mean, I know a little bit about how machine learning works, and a lot of times for me, it's about feeding data sets into into modeling programs that you've built. And there's a lot of great stuff in Python for that stuff. But talk us through a little bit about how you get from V1 of RoboFill to like V2 or V3 of RoboFill.
Yeah, it gets pretty crazy the more we go down the rabbit hole. But at the basic level, right? Some of this stuff is really just algorithmic and not quite like machine learning, and we do a little bit of both, and it's all mixed together. But like just like an if-then statement, right, is like the most basic way to think about like a financial or a fundamental. So if the word operating is in the tag, it probably belongs in the operating revenue bucket, right? And like a financial statement is just a math problem. This plus this has to equal that. And so when the system starts to understand the math problem and assigns if then and like looks at historical data and how decisions and things were made in the past and factors all that in, it can make better decisions moving forward. And so like it's more complicated than that, right? Like that's just like an algorithmic way to look at it. But the best part is this thing just gets better over time, and that's where the learning and the training part of it comes in, right? Because sometimes we see something crazy. Sometimes a company misfiles a statement, or they add a line of business and we see a data point we've never even seen in the financial before, right? Or they get a new accountant and they change the way they do things. Like it can get crazy and new things can pop in. But the second Phil fixes something or a human jumps in and does something, it learns from it and it takes it forward. So for example, like in the beginning, 5-6 years ago when we were building this tech, we had like an army of accounting interns, plus my CPA co-founder, plus Phil, and no RoboPhil yet. Like all of these people manually feeding in all of the training data, right? Like they were fixing financials and standardizing them and manually doing it. This was an ugly time. Like this was not fun work. This was like, they went through like literally every 10K and every 10Q, but to have the system watching and training and learning alongside that entire time, like over time, it just built up. And now it's like pretty self-sustaining. Like we don't really have anyone that has to touch it now, but it took a while to get there. So
you just locked interns in a room and made them like, you literally made them feed a machine.
That is not far off from the early days of Intrinio. Yes, there was a bunch of accounting students sitting around a table, and we fed them lots of pizza, and they got things going for us.
And they fed numbers into the computer. I love that. That's great. So we got a couple minutes left, just talking about, I think we touched a little bit on blockchain, but and I love what you guys are doing too with Intrinio, because you got SDKs in 6 languages. That's huge. You're making this accessible to everybody. But what's the future for you guys hold? Like what are you guys excited about? What's coming up? Is there gonna be like a riot on Wall Street? Or how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna take down the man?
Yeah, I think it's not quite so black and white like that, right? Like we still need the stock exchanges. Like it's going to be a long, long timeline before anything there changes. And we partner and we work really closely with them. So that's not really going away. But for us, one of the biggest initiatives we're working on is we're going international with some of our data. And then also sneak peek for you, since there's a recession going on right now and the economy is crazy, we're actually building a super affordable $99 a month like developer package. So that you just come to our website and in 30 seconds sign up, get API keys, $100 a month, off to the races with like a kitchen sink bundle of like a lot of our data sets. And so that's kind of like we get it, guys, inflation is here, like things are up. And so we're rolling out this kind of innovative, like really affordable entry level plan for people. So it's just in response to the environment. So we're working on that right now. We're going international with a lot of our data sets. And then also like part of my job as like the CEO and the thought leader and thinking through like the long term of this industry and all of the topics we've talked about today. One of the like scariest questions I like to ask, and like things that this is a concept I think about a lot, is when blockchain does become more mainstream, because there are real applications for trading with blockchain, right? Like other things. When that happens, in theory, if I'm going to trade a share of Tesla to you on some blockchain over here off exchange, do I need a stock exchange, a broker, a custodian bank, a clearinghouse, or even a data provider anymore? Because the blockchain is keeping custody. We don't need a custodian bank. Like we don't need an exchange. We're doing it on the block. I don't need a broker to broker the deal. Like I don't need any of that. The blockchain is, in theory, disintermediating all of those institutions. Do you know how big those institutions are? Custodian banks, stock exchanges, like we're talking about massive multi-billion-dollar institutions that in theory are in jeopardy if we move to a system like that. And then the question for me as a data provider is that becomes the source of the data. We're not getting stock prices off the exchange anymore. That's the price is being created on the on blockchain, which is an inefficient, like high latency way to pull data, and it's not an efficient way to get in and out of a blockchain. And so I'm like, what is that going to do even for the data industry? Like, where are these data feeds going to come from? And this is like 10, 15 years down the road, but like the kind of stuff I think about the future of Intrinio, right? And then how do we make data easier in that environment? That's going to be an interesting one.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think too, like, this really goes back to, decentralized internet, right? And, this is a little bit of what we were talking about backstage too. And that's actually a really cool use case that you brought up right now, because technically speaking, if that's stock that you own, somehow that is tangible, right? Like a lot of times when we think about this as far as like, oh, I own, 100 shares of Tesla or whatever, like you own, quantity 100 of that stock, right? But what is that? Like at the end of the day, what is a stock? You know what I mean? So it's interesting because now you start thinking about not just trading it on a blockchain, but that stock itself actually could be almost like an NFT, right? So but that's the thing is like, what are we actually trading? And it's really just fractional percent ownership in companies, right? And so you need to be able, that needs to be unique. It needs to be, you can't be able to replicate it. There has to be a ledger transaction. But then on top of that, how do you aggregate the data from blockchain ledgers? Because I imagine, like you say, clearinghouses, the stock exchanges, they're not going to want to go anywhere. They're going to, fight tooth and nail to make sure they are still where the transactions happen. But if people are able to start trading on a blockchain, how do we then aggregate the data from what's happening on the blockchain with what's happening in the mainstream stock exchanges to come up with an accurate real price for this stock, right? And that's kind of the mind-blowing thing, is like, how are you going to pull?
Yes. Because it's like, in theory, it's good to have more democratized, like spread out, diverse places to trade. Of course. But the more diverse places there are to trade, the more disparate and scattered all of the pricing information is. And then that becomes something that's locked up and there's red tape around it, right? So with good always comes a little bit of bad, there will be challenges to figure out. Yeah,
it's gonna be, I guess, mind-blowing, right? It's gonna be crazy to see how all this stuff comes together. Rachel, we are over time. Thanks so much for stopping by. I love what you guys are doing at Intrinio, and it's been a great conversation around making data more accessible, and hopefully everybody found it insightful. So thanks for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Carlos, you got any announcements before we go, or are we just going straight into the weekend on a Thursday?
No, actually, well, yes, we are going straight into the weekend. We have no further, for this week, we don't have any more interviews, but we do have, we have three, but the one that is confirmed for next week is this one as follows. And this will be with Amrinder Arora, the CEO of Biz Merlin, an HR platform, and some other cool stuff about how to deal with people internally. So anyway, that's what we have confirmed for next week, right here on Tech Backstage at 12 p.m. Pacific time. Join us right here, and remember, be here or be square. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Rachel.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Oops.
You forgot the